Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today's video is going to be about how to can some bone broth. We recently got some extra meat and so I had to make some room in our freezer, and that meant taking out some of these extra bones we had in there to make bone broth and can that up. And then we also have some fish that came from this freezer that got thrown out, and so I don't have room for it. Thought it'd be a good idea to can some of that up. And then also some roast and ground beef. I'm gonna leave the fish and the other red meat for a different canning video. In this one I'm only gonna share with you how to can the bone broth. So I'm gonna show you how I make my broth, how I make sure I have enough to actually run it through the pressure canner, how to run the pressure canner, and then how I store them. So let's get into it. I start by taking out the bones and putting it in my Insta pot. I can usually do one bag like this per round. So I fill it up with water to the max line on the Insta pot, and then I add a little bit of apple cider vinegar just to help release those minerals from the bones. And then I run it for about an hour on high pressure. After an hour, I release the pressure and then pour off the liquid from the bones through a strainer. Now I keep these bones and run it through a second time just because there's still a lot of gelatin goodness and some meaty parts on there, and I can usually get a second batch. So I'm getting the second batch going right away, and then I'm just putting a lid on what I just made to sort of keep that hot while I wait for the second batch to run through. Now by the time the Instapot has come up to pressure, run for the hour, and then releases a little bit of pressure, that's usually about 2.5 to 3 hours of time going by for me to actually get one batch going through. And so if you're doing this on the stove just with water, that may go a bit faster if you've got a really large pot and you can do more bones at once. I like the Instapot because I can just turn it on and leave it, but I do have to wait to run 2 cycles to have 6 quarts to be able to pressure can, so it is kind of a lengthy process, but I can usually do other things in the meantime, so it's sort of happening in the background, and while it seems like a really long time, it isn't actually all that long. Now when my second batch is nearly ready to come out of the Instapot, I can start by filling my jars. This is some really good bone broth. And then I grab my vinegar and wipe down the rims of each of the jars to make sure that there is not any kind of oil spills or any kind of fatty layer on top of there, to make sure that I have a really good seal. And then I find my jar lids, seal them up finger tight. I place a rack at the bottom of the pot. Then I pour about 2 to 3 inches of hot water into the pot. I boil this in my kettle just to make it go faster. Pour that into the pot, and then I add in my jars. So I can fit 6 quart jars into our All-American. I think we have the 921 All-American pressure canner. I'll leave a link down below if you're interested in this exact one that we have, but we can fit in 6 quart jars and a few pint jars on top of them. But I can do 2 layers of quart jars, just 1 layer. And then before I secure the lid on the canner, I use a rag and a little bit of olive oil just to rub on the seal and make sure that that metal to metal seal will be well lubricated and not get stuck. And then I secure the lid onto the canner at this specific notch. You'll see there's an arrow pointing to a little groove in the middle, and then this little lip that hooks underneath this metal part. And then I start tightening up the bolts. You'll see I grab the opposite ends, and then I'm just lightly tightening them initially, and then going back a second time and tightening the bolts really tightly, making sure that the lid is tightening to the base evenly all around. And then I turn on the heat and let the pot come up to a boil, and how I know that's happening is when there is a stream of steam coming from this vent pipe. As soon as I see steam coming out, I turn on my timer for 10 minutes and make sure that that steam is running continuously for 10 minutes before I add the weight. I grab this All-American Canner pressure cooker instruction booklet every time and read through this one page that just explains it really simply, and then I make sure that I follow these steps just to familiarize myself with it as I start canning. No matter what canner you have, make sure that you are following their canning instructions, read carefully, and follow all of the steps to make sure that you are doing this in a safe manner. That's what I'm doing here, and so I'm giving you the instructions for my canner, which may be different from your canner, so make sure that you're consulting your canner's manual. Now you should check on the FDA website to make sure what weight to use for whatever elevation you're at. Here where we live, we use 10 pounds of weight, so after 10 minutes I put on the weight at 10 pounds. And then I turn my stove down and wait until I hear this weight jiggle about 1 to 4 times in a minute. Now after you've canned for a little while, you'll know exactly at what temperature your stove needs to be at to hear the jiggle within that 1 to 4 times in a minute range. For me on our stove, I know that's just above number 4 on my biggest element. Now once the weight starts to jiggle, I start a timer and just make sure how many times it jiggles and stops and then jiggles again within 1 minute. Now you can start counting the processing time from the first jiggle as long as you're sure that it is jiggling within 1 to 4 times in that minute. Again, that's for my pressure canner, so you should make sure you read your manual and see when you can start counting your own processing time. You can adjust the heat on your stove until the pressure regulator weight jiggles only 1 to 4 times per minute. And the processing time will be dependent on your elevation, what recipe you're making, and if you want more information, you should check out the FDA website and follow their guidelines there. For my elevation, the processing time for broth is 30 minutes. If at any point the weight stops jiggling and doesn't jiggle again, you'll have to start all over again, and somehow the heat and pressure has gotten adjusted and needs to be corrected and start all over again. Now when the timer runs up and the food is cooked for the proper pressure time for the amount of time it needed to, you can turn off the heat source and then wait until that pressure comes all the way down to 0. For us, this takes about half an hour or around there. I wait until that dial comes all the way down, and then I take off the weight and I set my timer for 2 minutes and wait for that final steam to just release. After 2 minutes, I use a cloth to loosen all of the knobs so that I can take off the lid. Be very careful, the steam will be very hot, so you want to be real careful when you lift off the lid. And find a place that you can put this hot lid. Now these jars are very hot, and so I'm using one of these canning jar lifters to move my jars to an area that I've prepared with some cloth, and then I'm going to let them cool over here for the night. The next day I labeled my jars, and then I removed the ring that held on to the jars just to make sure that they all had a really nice seal, wiped every one of them down, and packed them away into our cupboards. Well, thank you so much for watching. If you found this inspiring, stay tuned for the next couple of weeks' videos where I'll be releasing more canning videos on canning our fish, some roast, and some mincemeat.